Hello, my name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my favorite books of 2024 video, at least so far. Right now, as I'm filming this, it is mid-July. We are about halfway through the year of 2024, and usually around this time of year, I like to make a video kind of like recapping my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I think I've read about like 135 books so far this year, and so I'm gonna be letting you know about my top 10 favorite books that I've read so far this year, and let me tell you, it was pretty hard to narrow it down. I've been having a really great reading year. I was looking through all the different 5 stars that I've had this year, and I've had so many. I did want to let you know about 3 honorable mentions that like almost made it into my top 10 but weren't quite in my top 10. One of those has got to be Funny Story by Emily Henry. I really adored this one. I thought it was so much fun, and I do think it's one of my favorite books from Emily Henry, but I don't think it quite made my top 10. And then same with The Most Fun We Ever Had. Oh my gosh, this one was such an unexpected new favorite. These days I don't read a ton of literary fiction, but this one was just especially so hard-hitting for me. I think if you're somebody who like has sisters, or if you like Little Women, or if you just like reading about complicated families and kind of like family drama, but that's really interesting and really well written, I do think that this might be up your alley. And then I also have Fantastic Land, which is a horror book that I read a little bit earlier this year that I just loved this. I thought the premise of this was just so wild and like ridiculous in a way, but it was just so fascinating. Like, this is one of those horror books that it's hard to pull your eyes away from all of the things that are happening on page. And it's very graphic and like over the top, but I just had a lot of fun reading this one. I especially think the audiobook experience for this one is really great because it's like a full cast audiobook, and this book is entirely told in like interview format, so like that's really cool. But yeah, those are the 3 that didn't quite make it into my top 10 because I've read such incredible books this year, so let's just jump right into it. There's not going to be any order, by the way. I'm really actually struggling with that, to be honest, like trying to pick which one of these books I would rank higher than the other. Like, I don't even know. But kicking off this list, we're going to talk about The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdi. This is one that I actually published back in 2022, but I read it this year during one of my Backlist Bonanza vlogs. This is one of those books that like I struggle even knowing how to like pitch this book to you because I do feel like it's best to jump into this book without knowing anything about it. But this one is a mystery thriller that just has a little bit more to the story than the average mystery thriller. This one feels like it's written with a lot of heart, which is something that I really love. It almost kind of reminded me of like Matt Haig's writing style, where it's just really beautiful, you really connect with the characters, but then there's also like really freaking shocking plot twists. I do want to say though that this book has an ending that's probably going to upset a lot of readers, which is why I think the average rating on Goodreads is probably a little bit lower than I thought it would be, because this ending is definitely one of those endings that's like an absolutely out of pocket, like what the fuck, like you could never predict this probably in a million years kind of ending. But I personally loved it. Like, there were so many twists packed into the end of this book that I personally did not see coming, and I thought it was wonderful. I literally cried at the end of this book, which like rarely ever happens to me during a mystery thriller read. So this one, the premise of this, it's kind of confusing even trying to pitch it to you, but basically there's this man named David, and he's writing about the biggest regret, which is the sudden separation that he had from his son Elliot. So we're not only following David's story though, we also do follow this woman named Harriet, and she's a police officer who's trying to clear her name because she had like a bad lapse of judgment, and she finds this book that has this writing on the side of the book that said, "Help, he's trying to kill me." And so she's trying to track down like who owned this book before, and then this note leads her to this guy David, and she finds out that David was last seen jumping off of a cliff, so he's recently killed himself. Police are suspecting that he probably killed himself because he couldn't deal with his wife's sudden death, so she starts to wonder like, well, was his wife the one who wrote this note? Oh, this book is just so interesting. I just think this is one that really pulls on your heartstrings, like it's really well written, and it has a lot of twists, which like what more could I ask for? Like that's everything that I'm looking for in a thriller. I had such a good time with this one. The next book that made it into my top 10 is gonna be The Measure. This one is actually another backlist book. I think this one also published in 2022, but I actually recently just read this for a video where I read books that you think that I'm gonna give 5 stars, and like holy shit. And not only did you recommend me a book that ended up being 5 stars, but you literally recommended me a book that ended up in my top 10 of this year potentially, because this book is one of those like thoughtful kind of like contemporary literary fiction type of books that has such a great premise, and it's one of those books that really makes you think about life and like what would you do in this situation. It's like one of those books that's like the perfect book club discussion book. Basically, we're following these characters who exist in this world where like one day all of these little boxes get delivered to everybody over the age of 22 years old, and when they open the box they see a little string in the box that is the measure of like the rest of their life. So basically everyone in the world is discovering how much longer they have left to live. If your string is very short, it's showing that you don't have that much longer of a life, or if your string is very long, you are probably gonna live for a very long time. And it's so fascinating fascinating to see how this affects their society. You know, we follow 8 different characters in this book, so we follow like a range of different experiences of people who are going through this. Even one of the people that we're following in this book is currently running for president. We follow these guys who are like in the military. We follow a lesbian couple. There are just so many different types of characters that we're following in this book, and I felt connected to all the characters. Like, I just love the way that this book was written. I thought it was written in such a beautiful and like sensitive way, but it was also just so thought-provoking. You know, it really encouraged a lot of discussion topics like, what would you do in this situation, or what would happen if this happened? And I feel like this author does a really great job at like addressing all kinds of different issues that could come from something like this. It would affect, you know, whether or not you're able to get a loan, because if people know that you're gonna die soon and you're not gonna be able to pay off your loan, then they don't want to give you a loan. Or like on dating apps, like how long is your string? Like that would be the thing, because like you don't want to waste your time. Oh my god, it was just fascinating. It was so cool. If this sounds intriguing at all to you, then I highly recommend picking it up because I thought it was so interesting. Next up is gonna be On the Same Page by Haley Cass, which this is definitely one of my favorite romances that I've read this whole year. And this is probably maybe my favorite female romance that I've ever read in my life. I loved this so much. It's wild too because this book is pretty lengthy, you know, it's over 450 pages, and I read this entirely with my eyeballs, which is saying a lot because I don't feel like I read a lot of books physically these days with just my eyes, especially in the romance genre, like especially. So for this to hold my attention for nearly 500 pages, like that's how you know there's some good shit in here. This story follows these 2 characters named Riley and Gianna, and they actually met when they were back in college. Like they were college roommates together when they lived in Boston and went to college. And it's so cool because now the story takes place, I want to say it takes place like 10 years later, and Riley is now working for the Boston News, and then Gianna is an influencer and she like has her own business. I found both characters to be very relatable and very interesting. I love that in this story we're going back and forth in between the chapters of like 10 years ago and then now in the present day. And what's really interesting about this is that 10 years ago when they were in college together, they didn't really like each other. Like they kind of had beef with each other. So it's really interesting to see how their like relationship has changed and evolved over time and how they've become closer. And I'm so shocked that I loved this book as much as I did because, you know, I talk about all the time how I don't really like friends to lovers romance. Like it's not one of my favorites, but for some reason it's like you make anything gay and then I'm like, yes, sign me up. For some reason when it's gay friends to lovers, that's like a completely different thing we're talking about there. Okay, that's so different and that's so interesting, especially when it's like pining for such a long time, like when it's 10 plus years. Oh my gosh, for some reason this just really worked for me. I was here for it. I thought these 2 had the cutest chemistry. Like they were so adorable together. And like there were so many moments in this book that had me squealing. You know, like I tabbed it. I literally tabbed it. All right, next up I wanted to talk about Kill for Me, Kill for You. This is another thriller that I read this year that I thought was so much fun. It was just so entertaining. Like this is one of the most entertaining thriller reading experiences I've had all year long. This one kind of has like the typical thriller setup, right? I mean, it's kind of like Strangers on a Train, where these 2 women, they meet each other and they decide that they're gonna help each other commit murder. Like they're gonna commit murder for each other. But then simultaneously, we're also following this character named Ruth, and like her home is invaded one night when she's like there living with her husband, and it's like a serial killer attack kind of situation, but he left her alive. And now she's trying to figure out like who was this man, what's going on there. And so you're kind of following like multiple different stories in this book. I just thought this book was so interesting. It was so fast paced. It's like one of those thrillers that has very short chapters, just keeps you flipping the pages, keeps you engaged. And there was a few twists towards the end of this book that I personally did not see coming. I was totally shocked and flabbergasted by this one. And I just had such a fun time with it. Oh my god, I want more thrillers like this one. It was just so fun. This book just reminded me why I continue to read thrillers. You know, it's for this experience. Like I live for the thrill. All right, next up is gonna be Diala by Jennifer Thorne. And like how wild, I know that I actually have my own BookTube book club pick in my top 10. Because if you didn't know, if you're new to my channel, I have a book club and it's called the BookTube, and it's basically a book club where we read thriller and horror books together once a month. And it's kind of like a long running joke at this point that I hate everything that I read for my own book club, because I've had my book club since 2021 and I just have this terrible track record of like picking books that I end up hating. But this year is the first year that I'm really starting to turn things around, because look at that, I have my own book club pick in my top 10. And this book, oh my god, I thought this was so great. This is a horror book if you couldn't tell from this like super creepy cover. And I thought this book was so entertaining because we're following this character named Anna, and she's going to Italy with her family, and her family is very toxic, by the way, and Anna is kind of like the black sheep in her family. Like they always give her shit, they always blame all of their problems on her. It's very much like the White Lotus kind of vibes, okay? Which I would definitely compare this to White Lotus, which is like one of my favorite TV shows. But then the family starts to suspect that something is happening at their villa that they're staying at in Italy, and they think that their place is haunted by this woman, and all of the people in the towns in Italy are telling them like, oh my god, there's this woman who's haunting your villa, and some freaky shit starts to happen when they're alone at night in the villa, and like, oh my god, dude, the atmosphere in this book, I just loved it, okay? I lived for the atmosphere in this. It was so creepy and so weird. Like the little girls like speaking Italian even though they don't know Italian. Like, oh my god, I'm sorry, that is so creepy. The idea of like scratching against the walls and if they could hear moaning in the nighttime, like, no, dude. Oh my god, that is so freaky. And the vivid descriptions of Italy, like, oh my gosh, I felt like I was literally in Italy while I was reading this. Like, I thought the atmosphere of it was so well done. And I do think the ending of this book is a little bit ridiculous, but I think that the author intended for it to get a little bit ridiculous at the end. I thought it was freaking genius personally. Like, I don't know, we had a really great discussion about this in the live show, so if you have read this book and you want to hear more of my spoilery thoughts, I would highly recommend checking out the live show that I had with Jan, because we had a really great discussion about what I think that this author was trying to do with the ending of this book, and I personally thought it was brilliant. Like, I thought it was so well done, and I thought she really achieved that like creepy kind of atmosphere that she was trying to go for. Alright, the next one on this list is gonna be like my most recent read out of everything, and that's gonna be The Horror. This is one that I actually just read during Summerween. Like, what the heck, what an unexpected favorite that just came out of left field. When I started this book, I was literally not expecting too much from it, to be honest, and this ended up being so up my alley with what I love in horror books. In this story, we're following this 84-year-old woman named Muriel, and she's living in this little Scottish fishing village that's called Witch Haven, and she's been living there her whole life. And now, all of a sudden, there's this big business corporation who's like trying to buy out the land that she and her neighbors are living on, because they want to build this like huge golf course like resort thing there. And so they're trying to buy her out. They're trying to like get her off the land, and she is like the most stubborn old lady being like, no, absolutely not. Like, I've lived here my whole life. I'm gonna die here. Like, you will not take this land from me. And then one day there's this very mysterious fog that creeps up, and it brings something truly disturbing with it. Okay, like, you can just imagine, look at this thing on the cover. Like, yeah, you can just imagine what the fog brings into the town. And this book was just, oh my god, it was incredible. It reminded me of so many things that I love. This is like one of those horror books that actually like moves you. Like, I was actually gonna cry reading this book because I was so touched and I was so moved by the characters and their story, but it was also equally graphic. Like, holy shit, I feel like this has got to be one of the most gory and graphic horror books that I've ever read. And the ending was just like, the ending of this book was everything. Like, I love this so much. Now I'm determined to try and read like every book that this author has ever published because of how much I loved this. This definitely gave me like Shape of Water kind of vibes. It definitely also reminded me a little bit of We Spread, just because of the way that we're following an elderly protagonist, and because I feel like there's a lot of similar discussions in this book about how we're so dismissive of elderly people in our society, or how like we stop treating them like they're real people. Oh my god, it was just so good. It was so moving. I literally almost cried. But just be warned that if you are gonna read this, like, this horror in this is so intense and like truly gory, really disturbing stuff. But I loved it. Oh my god, 5 out of 5 stars. One of my top favorites of the year. And then this next book, I do think that this is like my top favorite romance book that I've read so far this year, and it's gotta be Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Technically speaking, this is the third book in the series. You know, we have Part of Your World and Yours Truly, and then this is the third. Can read this one as a standalone, but I do think you'll get more out of this book if you've read the other two. But I was really surprised, you know, because I did love the other two books as well, but this one has got to be my favorite out of the three. I just really connected with Justin and Emma. Dude, I was so emotionally connected to them that I was like crying for most of the second half of this book. You know what's really wild too is that this book is such an emotional read, but the premise is just so lighthearted and kind of silly. The way that these characters meet is so silly because Justin just posts this thing online that's basically saying that he's cursed when it comes to dating, because every single girl that he dates goes on to find the love of her life like right after they date him. And then Emma reaches out to him and she's like, oh my god, like, I've been having the same curse. Like, every single time she dates a guy, he goes on to find the love of his life after. So then they decide that maybe if they date each other, they can cancel out the curse. I think what makes this book feel so serious though is that both of these characters are dealing with such heavy things going on in their family. Both of these characters especially have complicated relationships with their mothers, and that's something that they're really able to connect on. And I just, oh my god, this book just hit in a different way with those things. Like, it was so beautiful and moving. It had a few things in the plot that I was pretty surprised by. Like, I didn't see it going in that direction, and I was like, oh shit. So I feel like there was more to love in this story than just the romance, and I feel like that's why it's like one of my favorite romances of this year, because this book didn't just have a great romance. You know, like, I feel like this book had really great story in it, family connections in this, and like the found family feeling in this book. I love the way that it all took place in the town. Wasn't it Minnesota? I think this one did take place in Minnesota, but I love the way that Minnesota itself also felt like a character or like part of the story. Like the town really just came to life in this story too. Another book that I have very, very recently just read that has launched itself into my top favorites of this year is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. And once again, we have another horror book making the list. I think this is the third horror book. So in this story, we're following this young girl named Ji-won, and she's Korean American. She's living with her mom, and her family's currently going through it because their dad has recently left their family. So she's dealing with her mom, who's kind of like falling apart every single night. And her mom keeps telling her, don't forget to eat the eyes of the fish when they're eating fish, because she says the eyes are the best part, and the eyes are supposed to bring you good luck when you eat the eyeballs of the fish. And her and her sister are kind of like disgusted by it at first, but then our main character, Ji-won, she's like, okay, like one night she just eats the eyeballs, and then it starts this whole fascination with her with the idea of eating eyeballs. And I feel like this is one of those stories that definitely reads like such a slow burn. Like this is literally one of those books where it's just a slow burn watching a character fall into madness, like watching a character slowly losing their mind. And I love this, dude. I loved everything about the writing style in this. It was just so interesting. I think one of the toughest things about this book, but something that made it feel even more real to me, is that her mom, you know, after her dad abandons their family, very shortly after that, her mom starts dating this white man, and George is just like literally a walking red flag. Like everything about him is just a walking red flag of a man. And so it was really like difficult to read about some of the scenes with him and like the way that he would treat these daughters. It was just like everything about him was just giving me the ick in the most visceral of ways. Like I was just having a reaction to everything that was happening on page. I actually annotated this book, and I haven't annotated a book with a highlighter in such a long time, but I literally had to make a highlight just for red flags or annoying behavior from men, because there was so much of it in this book that was so disturbing to read. You know, it really added to the horror of this book, reading all this weird behavior from grown men. Oh my gosh, the ending of this book was just so incredibly satisfying. Like I don't think the ending of this book is anything like crazy or like unpredictable, or like you're not gonna be shocked. It's not like there's like plot twists or anything really wild happening at the end of this book. The things happening at the end of this book were just so satisfying. Like it was just so smart. It was so brilliant the way that it was written, and everything about this just really worked for me. You know, it checked all my boxes. I think if you're somebody that's like disgusted by the idea of eyeballs or like eating eyeballs, oh my god, it was so descriptive to the point where I was like, yo, like that's disgusting. But like that's what I want in horror, you know, like I want the shit that freaks me out, you know, like I want the shit that gets to me in that way that just grosses me out. So this was everything that I love in horror, and I will definitely be keeping my eye on anything that Monica Kim publishes in the future, because are you kidding me? Okay, these last two books that I have in my top 10, honestly, either one of these could be my #1 book of the year. Like I cannot even physically decide right now which one of these books that I love more. I don't know. But one of them is gonna be Once There Were Wolves. There's just something about it. It owns my whole heart. I said after finishing this book, I said, this is a 6-star book. Not even a 5-star, it's a 6-star. Like I love this. You know what's wild is that this is a book that came out in 2021. It's been sitting on my shelves for literally forever, and I only read it this year because I was doing that video where I was reading books recommended for fans of Stick Season by Noah Kahn. I don't know if I ever would have picked this up on my own, and the fact that I loved it as much as I did is just totally mind-boggling to me. In this story, pitching it to you, it's gonna sound like it's not even something that I would like to read, because we're following this character named Inti, and she arrives in Scotland with her twin sister, and basically like their job is to reintroduce the wolves into their society in Scotland, because they're having like a problem with their ecosystem, and they think that wolves would help solve some problems within their ecosystem. But then a lot of the locals in Scotland are like, we don't want the wolves, like fuck you, it's gonna fuck up all of our shit here, whatever. So there's a lot of tension, you know, in the town. Like a lot of the locals do not want them there. And then the main story that ends up taking place with this one is that there's a murder in the small town, and it looks like maybe one of the wolves might be responsible for the murder. But then there's also this investigation on like, well, was it somebody trying to make it look like the wolves were the ones responsible because they don't want them there? Or was it actually a wolf that was responsible for this? And oh my gosh, dude, there was just something about this book, like the freaking atmosphere. This is one of those books that really makes you want to like be outdoors, you know? It's almost like you can feel it. The descriptions of nature in this book are just beautiful and stunning, and it just really made me feel a lot of things. I also think, oh my god, Inti as a character, she's definitely one of my favorite characters that I've read this year, and her relationship with her sister, there is such a strong sister relationship in this book, and the things that have happened to them, because you know, in this story, we not only get present day, but we do get a lot of like flashbacks to like their childhood. Oh my god, the things that they went through together. There's a lot of really interesting and thought-provoking discussion in this book about, you know, violence and what violence looks like in humans versus animals. There were just so many great moments. There were so many beautiful ass quotes that I was tabbing and highlighting like crazy. Like, just listen to one of these quotes. Oh my gosh. She's like, I think it's civilization that makes us violent. We infect each other. She says, I used to think people were good too. I used to think we were mostly kind, all of us forgivable, but now I know better. Ooh, or how about this one? There are languages without words and violence is one of them. Ooh, this book just had so much to say and I was here for all of it. And I was literally crying. Like, there were so many moments in this book that just, oh my god, brought tears to my eyes. I thought it was so beautiful. These characters just really mean the world to me. I can definitely see myself rereading this very soon, actually. Like, I kind of want to reread this before the end of the year because of how much I loved it. And then the only book that's competing with this for like my favorite book that I've read so far this year is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, which, like, I know, how shocking that my own BookTube book club pick, this was a pick from January this year, and this is actually a contender to be my #1 favorite book that I've read this year. I never thought I would see this day, to be honest, with my own book club. Like, how great is this? This book was so hard-hitting. This book was so moving. This book was very thought-provoking. You know, like, this book really made me think. So in this story, we're following this character named Pamela, and she is the president of this sorority house, and this story is inspired by the sorority house that was targeted by the real life serial killer. So this book was very inspired by like the Ted Bundy case and like what happened to those women. What I think was so hard hitting and beautiful about this story in particular is that this author really took these women's voices and amplified them. And this story is very much about the women and what they had to go through. He is literally never named, not even one time. He is called the defendant anytime he is talked about in this book because it's not about him. It's not his story. I love the way that this book addresses how freaking weird it is, the glamorization that we have of these serial killers in our society and the way that we just like idolize them. I love how this book just points out the language that we use matters when it comes to talking about these people. Like, he was not charming, he was not brilliant, he was not smart, he was just your typical misogynistic loser. And for some reason, because some people thought that he was attractive, they just thought that he could get away with anything, or they thought that he was brilliant and like levitating above everybody else. Like, no, he was just some random loser who was going around killing women, and that's awful. And I love that this book just really points that out to an extreme. If you didn't know, the judge is actually famously known for saying to Ted Bundy, like, you were a bright young man. Like, he literally said that to him in the courtroom. He's like, you know, it's such a shame that you've murdered all these women because you are such a bright young man. And so I love that this author literally titled this book Bright Young Women as like a fuck you to like all the people who ever glorified Ted Bundy. Like, oh my god, I love everything that this book stands for. It really moved me. And if you want to see more of my thoughts on this book, we had a really, really great book club discussion talking about it earlier this year, so I'll have that linked down in the description. But like, wow, dude, Bright Young Women is just, it really did that for me. Like, everything for me, it feels like it was handled very sensitively. So like, both of these books are definitely competing for my #1 spot this year. Like, I honestly feel like I need to reread both to figure out which one I love more, because at this point, like, I don't even know. All right, so those are my top 10 books that I've read in the year of 2024. Can you believe? I would love to know if you've read any of these books that I just talked about. I would love to know what you think about any of them. Do you think any of these books would also make your favorites of this year? And if not, I mean, definitely let me know. What do you think some of your top favorite books are of this year so far? Like, do you have a top 3? Do you have a top 5? Because if you do, definitely leave a comment and let me know, because I'm gonna be looking through them. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.